All right, so hi everybody, it's Philip here. The question was asked, can we add collapsible accordion frequently asked question sections to ClickFunnels? The short answer to the question is yes, you can if you have some knowledge of jQuery, JavaScript, and CSS. But this tutorial is going to show you how to work with a little bit of basic JavaScript and basic CSS selectors so you can learn how to do this on your own. I do have a full working solution, so if you need that, just let me know. But let's just start out with some basics that you're going to need to know. So I always start out with a new section just to make sure I'm not going to affect anything here. So let me go ahead and add a new section. Let's just go with a wide section here. I always like to put my new sections with their own names. That way they're easier to see inside of the selection selector window. And if I ever have to control them, like show or hide them, they're easier to target. So we're going to click on settings, click on the hash here, and we're just going to say FAQ-section. All right, update, done. So now she is an FAQ section. I want to teach you just some basics about selections and how we can do things inside of from jQuery. So to add your own custom scripts, unless you're going to include them on your page, which isn't always necessary, you can do that here inside of tracking code, and you can go to footer code, and you're going to just inline some scripts here. So always start your scripts with script tags like this, so that the system knows, hey, the code under here is going to be some script tags. Now the first thing you need to understand about jQuery is it can be written like this, jQuery, or more appropriately, like this. So we're going to start with a $sign. We're going to go to a parenthesis, which means, hey, pay attention. This is probably a method or a selector call. Now, one thing that we know is when we go in ClickFunnels and we set a title to an element, whether it's a row, a section, or just a physical element, that is a data attribute. So on the actual HTML element, there'll be an attribute that says data-title, and it'll have a value. To be able to target that, we have to write a CSS selector. So we're going to write an open bracket here so that it knows that there's a selector coming up. I'm going to say data-title. And because all of my titles are going to start with something specific, like FA section, FA header, or FA content, right? What we're going to do is use the starts with modifier here, which is just a pipe. And that pipe is usually on the shift key when you press shift and backslash, usually above the enter key on Windows computers. You can get a little pipe there, and that means it has to start with whatever we're going to tell it to look for. So I'm going to say it must start with FAQ, and let's just say in this case section. Okay, and then I can close that. And that is my first CSS selector. So I'm telling jQuery to target any type of row or element inside of this HTML page that has a data title that starts with FAQ section. And just for the sake of argument, we can tell it to hide or show. And we're just going to say show. So I'm just going to say CSS display, and let's just say block. So again, the anatomy of this is going to be our command selector, which is the $sign, our open parentheses, which tells the system to, hey, pay attention, we're about to tell you something, and then our CSS selector. And since we gave the row or section down here a title of FAQ section, we're going to say data-title with that little pipe that says it must start with FAQ section, and then it's going to run that command .css display block against it so it always is visible. So that's the basics of how to do your selection. So that's going to set our CSS section to visible. Okay, and we can always verify that. We're going to come over here and set the background of this to, say, blue. And let's click on the section, and we're going to hide it, save it, and if we preview it, it's now visible. It's hidden on our editor, but visible here. So let's go back to our editor, and let's show that section. Remember, I gave it a title, so FAQ section is now in our list, easier for us to see. And now let's go ahead and start working with this section. First of all, I'm going to get rid of that background color. We really don't want it, so let's just say nothing. And then let's start adding some rows. Okay, so for our new row, let's go ahead and choose a new row. Let's make it a 2-column row so that we can have text on one side and an icon on the other. And for this, we're going to add a headline here, and we're going to add an icon. There we go. There's our icon. Let's go ahead and choose a plus sign for the icon. So we'll click on it, we'll go to advanced, and we'll choose, the plus sign. I do always recommend making this a bit smaller. Defaults to 55, way too big. Let's make it 30, give it some 5 margin on the top. Our headline is also a little bit too big. It defaults to 32. Let's set it to 24. And let's also set it to left align, so it's on the left side of the box there. One more thing, just to make sure it's all down at the same height, we're going to give it a top margin of 5, because that's what we did with the icon. Next thing after that is let's go ahead and set our margins on the top to 0, margins on the bottom to 5. We set for 5 on top of each one of those, so we might as well leave it that way. And we can also set our left and right to 0. Last things last, this looks all nice and well, but we need a background color, so let's make a nice little blue background color and change the text color to white. Alright, so there is a basic headline there. Looks a little boxy, but we can, get that to work with whatever styles we want, rounded corners or whatever. The last things last here is I'm going to add a border, a full border around it, and I do this so that when we add the border to the section below it, it doesn't look clipped. And I can show you what that looks like, but the point is if we don't border on the top and we put a border on the section below it, it won't line up correctly. And the border on the top should be the same as the background color, so it blends in nicely, and then we're done. Okay. The only other thing that we're going to do with this section is give it a title, and let's call this one FAQ header, and it's the first header. Now this number at the end is important whenever we do stuff where we want to programmatically access individual elements underneath it, because when jQuery selects each one and we click on each one, we want to know which corresponding section we're going to work with. So this 1 is very important, because if we click on 1, we can parse what number it is and then tell jQuery, hey, look, I want you to go ahead and display a content box with that same number. So we'll update that. It is not necessary to change the CSS selector title for the icon sign, but I prefer to do it. It's just a good coding standard. If you're going to do it for one thing, you should do it for all major elements, just so you can select them a little bit easier when you're writing your jQuery. So we'll just update that to FAQ icon and be done with it. So now we have FAQ header, FAQ icon, and we're done. So let's go ahead and add a content box. So add new row. Sometimes the editor does break. If that happens, just save your page, refresh. And then once you're done refreshing, you'll be able to add your rows. So we're just going to add a standard content box, one single column to where everything is either left aligned, centered, or whatever. We can do 2x2s, 3s. It doesn't really matter which one we choose here. I'm just going to choose one column for right now. Now, just like I did on the top, what we're going to do is set a border right off the bat so it looks correct. So here's our full border. Let's set that to blue, and now it looks like it belongs with the content in the top part. See? It all aligns correctly. So now that we have a content box, let's go ahead and add what it would somewhat look like. Now, most FAQ sections are going to have a title with some content underneath it. The great thing is we're using ClickFunnels, so we can add whatever we want in our FAQs. Unlike other predefined FAQ things where we can only add text, now we can add whatever we want because we're programmatically showing and hiding the road. So let's say that I want a subheadline, and let's say that I want a paragraph in here just to make it look good. And if you're going to left align things, you might as well stick with left aligning stuff. Looks good right there. Maybe up here in the row, we don't want such a huge top margin. Maybe 5 and 5, so it looks a little bit cleaner and a little bit more streamlined. And maybe for the paragraph, we don't want 15. We want, let's say 10. Yeah, 10 looks a little bit better. And so there you go. Now we have a nice little area. The last thing we want to do is specify that this row is going to be our FAQ content number 1. And we're setting it to FAQ content number 1 so it matches the FAQ header number 1. So when we parse our JavaScript, we know which content we wish to show. So there's the basics that you have right there. All right, so there you go. Now you actually have a box in here that allows you to have a headline and a content. So what do we do with that? We need to actually do something with it. If we go back to our code, we can do stuff with it. All right, so the very first thing that we want to do on show is to make sure that we're hiding all the content boxes, because we don't want to show all the content boxes when it's visible. So just like we did at the top, we're going to tell jQuery to pay attention to a selector. And so we're going to say, our open bracket here, data-title. It starts with, and what did we call it? We said FAQ content. Okay? So if it starts with FAQ content, CSS display, none. I don't want to see any of the content boxes when the page loads. Okay. And we'll preview it, and sure enough, it is gone. See? Next things next is we need to tell it to do something when somebody clicks on this headline. So if somebody clicks on the headline, we want it to show that content. So for this one, we're going to use a custom command of jQuery called each. So for each and every single element on the page, we want to do something. All right. So let's just bring up our selector again. So we're going to say data title equals, and we're going to do this on the headers here. So FAQ header. So if it starts with FAQ header, we're going to say this is what I want to do against you. Okay. Each. And now we're going to say a function. So we'll say function. The next thing that we're going to do is we know that our headers actually have something like FAQ header -1, so they have a number in them, and that number is always going to be on the end. And a simple JavaScript way of finding something that's delimited, like separated by dashes, is just to split the string. So we could say let, I don't know, ID equal to, and let's just say we're going to say it's going to be equal to this dot data title split on dash. There we go. And so let me explain this command a little bit here. $this first section here, is telling JavaScript that for each of the elements that goes through, for that specific element, take these actions. So it's going to start with the first header, and then it's going to say this is equal to the first header, so it always knows what it's referencing. I'm going to pull the data title, the content of data title, which is FAQ-header-1, and I'm going to split that into what we call an array, which is a list of objects, or in this case, a list of strings. And then we're going to split that based on that little dash character. So what this should actually do is our data title attribute of the first header is FAQ header 1. We will split this into an ID object that should contain FAQ header 1. And we do this so that we can reference that last part on the end, so that we can tell jQuery, hey, look, we want to control this. All right, so there we go. We're going to reference the last part on the end. But we do need to make sure that ID is greater than 0, so it's successfully split. Okay, so if ID.length, and ID.length tells us how many items are in that new array. So it should have 3 items in the array. Okay, so if ID.length, if I say it's greater than 0, then I'm expecting at least 1 item in the array. So let's just go ahead for right now and just say it's greater than 0. So as long as we were actually able to successfully split it, then we can go ahead and move on. So as long as we're able to split it and get the actual number on the end, then we can tell jQuery to do something. And what we're going to tell jQuery to do is add an event handler to this header so that once it's clicked, it displays the content. So same thing that we did at the top. We're going to do our jQuery selector and say this dot on click. That's our function. We want the user, if they tap on it or click on it with their mouse, it's going to fire a click. On means, hey, pay attention. I'm setting an event listener. And then we're going to say what we're going to do. Function. So we're going to create a new function. And we're going to do whatever it says to do in this function. We're going to create another variable here called letCell, so cell for selector, and we're going to set that equal to the object that we actually clicked. And we're going to write this a little bit different here. It's a little bit more of an advanced command, but I'm pretty sure you can grasp it if you've kept up to this point. So JavaScript selector, we're going to say data title starts with, just like we did before, no difference. and we're going to say equal to FAQ content dash. This time we're not going to put anything else in there. We don't know what we're going to actually put in there because the SEL ID, we don't know what it is yet. Okay? And so now we're going to tack on, or concatenate is what JavaScript calls it. Essentially, we're joining two things together. So since we have a string at the beginning, I'm going to join another object to it, which makes one string. So we're going to put the plus sign. And we're going to go back to our array, which contains FAQ, header, and 1. And we're going to say ID 2. And this means simply the third element in the array. And the third element in the array is the number that we want. So we're going to go with that, third element in the array. And then we're going to concatenate another part of the string, which is the final part of the selector. Right here, close it. Make sure you're always matching things. If you have an open bracket here, you should have a closed bracket here. If you have an open single quote here, you should have a closed single quote. Always match them, otherwise your selectors won't work. But the format of this command is very simple. We're going to declare a variable, which is a cell, and we're going to tell jQuery to look for the element that has the data title of the ID that we split. So in this case, FAQ-header-1 is the final thing that comes out. So this should be, when jQuery parses it, it's going to say FAQ-header-1. So now that we have our selector, what are we going to do with it? We need to make a decision. If it's already visible, we need to hide it. If it's not visible, we need to hide everything else and then show our selection. Okay? So the best way to write that is a simple if command. So if something, do something, else do something else. And so we already have a selector called cell, so we're going to say if cell.css display, which is what we've already been messing with, is equal to, let's say, block, then we already know that it's visible. Else, it's not visible, so let's show it. So if it is visible, hide it. If it's not visible, show it. So if it is already visible and we click on that box, we want to hide everything. And the easiest way for us to hide everything is just to make jQuery run that display on everything, like we did up here. In fact, we can just copy and paste that object right there. So now our data title for anything that's FAQ content is going to hide it. Otherwise, we're going to show it. Now, the first thing that we need to do is hide all the other boxes first. Now it's going to be hiding all the other boxes. This makes the accordion work. And then we're going to say show, so cell, which is our selector that we have there, .css display block. Right? There we go. So if it's already visible, hide everything. Okay? If it's not already visible, then we want to show it. And after hiding everything else. So let's test that and see what it does. Make sure our logic is sound here. So we have a single box here. If we click on it, we see it. If we click on it again, it goes away. Click on it, we see it. Click on it again, it goes away. Not a great test. There's only one item there. Okay, so let's go ahead and add a second item here. We need a better test. So we don't need to recreate all the boxes or anything else like that. We like the format that we're using right now. So let's go ahead and just clone the row. So we're going to clone the row, and then we're going to move that row down one. And we're going to clone the content. Let's say we want the same content layout. And we're going to move that content down one. So now we have two FAQ items here. One thing for sure that we want to do is add some additional spacing in between them. So let's add some 5 margin here to the second one. Just for differentiation's sake, let's add a 2 here and a 2 here so we know it's the second content. Now once we've cloned the header and content rows, we do want to make sure that we change the CSS titles. So this is going to be -2 this time for the header. And for the content, it's going to be -2. See? Nothing more complex than that. I didn't have to add icons. I didn't have to change anything else. All I had to do was make sure that our titles were correct. And so now if I save this and I preview it, I now have 2 items. If I click on the first one, I see the first one. If I click on the second one, I see the second one. If I click on the second one again, it hides, just like any normal accordion would. Very simple. And that is the basics of how you can add it in there. Now there are some additional challenges in here. One thing that you'll notice is if I resize this down to mobile, it stacks. And if it stacks, it just doesn't look good. There's ways around that with CSS. And if you learn a little bit more about CSS, you'll be able to learn that you can make these two rows display in what we call inline block, and then give them specific sizes. And I'll show you a brief example of that. So if we come over here to CSS for custom CSS, we're going to say that the left column and the right column should display inline block. So how do we specify that? Well, very similar to what we did with jQuery, we're going to use another selector. And the exact same selector we used in jQuery, we can pretty much use here. And we can just say, hey, look, for anything that's left column or right column that belongs to this particular header or this particular section we want to work with. So the very first thing that we want to do here is do our selector, just like we did in jQuery. And we're going to say data title starts with, and then let's say it's going to be FAQ, and we said header. Okay. So if it's the FAQ header title, which is the only thing we want to mess with, now we're going to say it's a div, because all of these are little divs, which are tiny little building blocks of a website. And we're going to say inner content, because it's what's inside of the header that we want, dot call left, which is the left-hand column, which is where the header text is. We're going to do something with that. We can copy and paste that and change left to right, so we can mess with that. One of the more important CSS selectors in this pattern for us is to make sure that both of those elements are displaying inline block on one line. Doesn't matter if it's on mobile, doesn't matter if it's on desktop, we're going to make sure it displays in block on one line. So first things first, let's say display is equal to inline block, meaning display it inline. And the second thing is for the left-hand column, we want to set a fairly large width. So let's say width is going to be equal to, I don't know, let's just say 89%. Okay. Now we already noticed down here in the preview that when we changed that, it changed it in for the preview. We say 90%. We can say 95%. That makes it too big. How about 89%, just for the sake of argument. Okay. And then let's come down here to call right and say display is equal to inline block. Width is equal to 14%. Okay. 14% is too big. You saw that it wrapped. Let's go 13, 12, 11. Oh, we can probably get away with 11, just for this particular view. Okay. And so now we're actually displaying them left to right. And the importance of that is this. If I come over here to mobile, our mobile view is still stacking them for one very important reason. On mobile, we need to adjust our widths a little bit. Instead of 89, we might say 85. And you see how it wraps it now? And we have a plus sign on there. And we can do that with media queries, and I'll teach you that next. But the point is it still displays inline block like that. So I'm going to put it back at 89 for desktop. Okay, go back to desktop here. And now it displays for desktop just like that. Now I'm going to teach you something about a media query. And websites use media queries to say if a screen size is less than a specific size, we're going to go ahead and use a different CSS for that individual situation. So if it's on a smartphone, for example, use this CSS. All right. Let me go ahead and I'm going to copy and paste that in and show you what that looks like. All right, so here is our basic media query. For everything, we're going to use 89 and 11. We can also use 85 and 14, but 89 and 11 looks pretty good right here. So we're just going to go ahead and paste this one in right here, and I'm going to explain it. Okay. So right here we have a media query, and a media query tells the browser to pay attention to something that we're going to put a constraint on. So media query is only for the screen, and if the minimum device width is 320 and the maximum device width is 480, which is typical for most smartphones, we're going to say instead of setting it to 89 and 11, we're going to set it to 85 and 14. Okay? And then we're going to also remove the extra padding that ClickFunnels adds to the top of stacked elements. Because even though we're displaying them in line, ClickFunnels doesn't know that, so it tries to add additional margin on top. So we tell it to hide that margin on the right column so things look clean. This website is Media Queries for Common Device Breakpoints. It's on responsivedesign.is. and it shows you all the primary media queries. By default, you should definitely be programming for landscape and portrait. Basically for smartphones, you should be coding for iPads, and then adjusting your left column and right column widths to be whatever is going to be on there, and then large screen and desktop. So pretty much everything from here up you want to test and code for, so that you're not making things look funny on your screen. All of these down here are specific use cases that have different mobile widths and mobile heights, and you can code for those too if you really want to spend time doing that. But the top ones up here will help you refine your design just a little bit more to work with. All right, so now that I pasted the CSS in, we can see that some things have changed here. We could refine it a little bit more to move this over so it's not so far to the right. But my point is you can adjust all of your spacings yourself. They don't have to be 85/14. They can be whatever you want to set them to. I believe right now on large screen, I believe I am using 95% if I come down to large screens, since I have a large screen. Yeah, I'm using 95% and 4%. I might want to use something like maybe 90% and 8% on this one. So 90% and let's say 8%, or maybe 93% and 5%. I think 93 and 5% looks better, because it's still left and right aligned there and it looks good. So let's go ahead and set this back to 93 and 5% for those ones right there. And I can change that for each and every single one of the ones that would be for large screen formats or large DPI formats. Some of these are different. They're 85, they're 88, they're 90, they're 94. It's all based on the testing that you do, and I'm going to show you how to do some of that testing as well. So let's just save the page now that we have all of our media queries in there and everything's displaying inline. And we're going to preview it. It definitely still works, no issue there. We get everything to display the way that we want, and it hides. One little neat trick of Chrome, for example, as well as Firefox, is you do have the ability to preview different device types. So if I right-click on the screen and I go to Inspect, that's going to bring up our little dev tools. If you have that enabled, which most people should, then if right up here at the top in Chrome, there's this device toggle. Firefox is very similar, but there's a device toggle. If you turn it off, you get the full desktop view. But if you toggle it on, it's going to start showing you what it looks like in different views. So let's just say that I want to know what it looks like on an iPhone 6 or 7 or 8. Just the basic iPhone 6, 7, or 8. Now I can see that it looks correct on an iPhone 6, 7, or 8. It's all displayed inline. Everything wraps nicely. It's not ugly. What about on an iPad? So we come down to an iPad. Well, there we go. On the iPad, it actually has a larger width on the left-hand column, so it looks good. What about on an iPhone 10? Sure enough, no problem. Looks good on an iPhone 10 as well. So those media queries actually really do help us to make things look very, very nice. So I hope you guys learned a little bit about jQuery, about CSS, and about how things work when you want to do custom code here in ClickFunnels. I'm going to go ahead and end the tutorial now. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know. Obviously, there's other ways that you can do this. It can be made more efficient code. It can be changed a little bit for the CSS as well, using maxed width or whatever else. But, you know, it gets the job done, and it gets the requirement done for a collapsible FAQ section on ClickFunnels. All right, guys. Have a great day.